Hi there, I'm Davey Cretin for Cretin Classics, and I just wanted to make this quick tribute video for the late Mike Pinder from the Moody Blues, who passed away a few days ago on April 24th in Northern California. Mike Pinder played keyboards with the Moody Blues. He was with the band for about 15 years or so, from 1964 to 1978, and he was the last surviving member of the original quintet. Now, a lot of people might not know, some of you know out there, that the Moody Blues started in 64 as a psychedelic pop R&B band in England, and the members of the Moody Blues at the time were Mike Pinder on keyboards, Graham Edge on drums, Ray Thomas on flutes and windwoods and vocals, Clint Warwick on bass, and Denny Lane on guitar. So they formed in 1964 the quintet out of the ashes of various bands. And they had a big hit in 1965 with the song Go Now. It went to number one in England and it reached number 10 in America shortly after. They released a lot of singles and they never really had that big hit like they did with Go Now. Eventually, and I think it was 1966, Warwick, the bass player, and Denny Lane, the guitar player, they left the band. So the band recruited two new members, Justin Haywood on guitars and vocals, and John Lodge on bass and vocals. And this is the band that hit it big. They had their second round of success, the Moody Blues. And in 1967, they released the first of their what's called their Core 7 albums, Days of Future Past. So this is when the Moody's really hit their stride. And they had 7 studio albums between 1967 and 1972. They started with Days of Future Past in 1967, and then came In Search of the Lost Chord in 1968, On the Threshold of a Dream in 69, also in 1969, To Our Children's Children, A Question of Balance in 1970, Every Good Boy Deserves Favor, EGBDF for the chords. It's how it's written out. 1971 for Every Good Boy Deserves Favor. And then the last studio record of this time period of the Core 7 was Seventh Sojourn in 1972. So that's supposedly what they call their Core 7 albums, from albums 2 to number 8. Then the band went on hiatus for a few years, regrouped in late 77, and released Octave in 78. And Pinder was a part of the band the whole time, even though they were on hiatus, they all released solo records. Going back a little, Mike Pinder was the keyboard player for the Moody Blues. I mean, he also played a lot of other instruments. He played tablas, he played various percussion, he played cello, bass, electric guitar, acoustic guitar. The guy was a multi-instrumentalist, and he did a lot of work on the Moody Blues albums. He was their musical director for their whole career, basically. Sort of like Rick Wakeman was with Yes in the early years when Wakeman was with Yes. So Mike Pinder had a much bigger role than people think. And of course, he's mainly known for the Mellotron. He was one of the first guys to use the Mellotron, which is a keyboard that's based on tape loops. It's like now it's considered an ancient thing, but a lot of progressive rock fans, and even though the Moody's started as like a psych pop band, R&B psych pop band, they developed into a progressive rock act, mainly because of Pinder and his use of the organ, piano, and the Mellotron was a big thing, which of course the Moody's sort of got there first with the Mellotron, and then Crimson was big with the Mellotron, yes, ELP, etc., ad infinitum. So Pinder programmed it. He knew how to fix it when it broke down. He took this beast that was a behemoth of an instrument on the road, and the Moody's toured the world because they were very famous, very popular, both in Europe and here. They played all over. And Mike Pinder, for many years, brought the Mellotron with him. He knew how to fix it. He knew how to work it. He was supposed to play Mellotron, and I didn't know this. I found this out. Very interesting. He was on John Lennon's 1971 album, Imagine. He was supposed to play Mellotron on it, and he had initially turned his friend John Lennon onto the Mellotron in the late 60s. And Lennon thought it was such a cool instrument. He's the one that brought it to the attention of the other Beatles. And that's how the Beatles began to use the Mellotron, thanks to Mike Pinder from the Moody Blues. Fascinating stuff. But when he got to the sessions and he looked at Lennon's Mellotron, he said the tapes were like a bowl of spaghetti. He couldn't get it to work. He didn't even bother. So instead of playing Mellotron on Lennon's 1971 Imagine album, he just played some percussion. So pretty fascinating stuff. I mean, you had also Alan White from Yes, who eventually became Yes's second drummer. He also played with John Lennon. He was in the Plastic Ono band. So Lennon has some nice progressive rock connections there. But getting back to Mr. Pinder. So the Moody's had this big hit with Go Now. They recruited new members, and then they had their golden period of all those great albums I mentioned. Now, basically, it just turned out that Hayward and Lodge wrote a lot of the catchier songs that were released as singles. So all the really big songs from the late 60s, early 70s that everyone knows from the Moody's, I'm just a singer in a rock and roll band, In Question, Ride My Seesaw, etc., etc. All the songs like that were basically written by Hayward and Lodge, but Pinder wrote a lot of songs, and he contributed a lot. He was probably best known for writing the song Melancholy Man and another song called Om, 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 the chanting song. He was also into transcendental meditation. Yes, Mr. Pinder was. He was a big proponent of that way before Howard Stern got into that. So this was the Moody's golden period, 67 to 72, and they had hit albums all over the globe. They toured everywhere, and he was a focal point of the group. Mr. Pinder was. So when the band took hiatus in 74 to like late 77 when they got back together to record the Octave album for 1978, Mike Pinder did release his first solo album in 1976 called The Promise, and it has a very colorful cover. Very pretty cover. And when I worked in the record stores, that was a rare record. We used to charge like $20 for that back in the day. So he contributed to the 1978 comeback album after the hiatus called Octave. He only contributed one song. He played some keyboards on it. He does great keyboard work. The intro to Steppin' in the Slide Zone, which was the big single from the record, this whole synthesizer type beginning. He'd gotten away from the Mellotron by 1977, 1978, and he does some nice synth work on that song. And going back, you could really hear Pinder's Mellotron on a really good deep track from the early 70s called Watching and Waiting. And you just hear the Mellotron swells and swirls on that song. And it's very prominent in the mix. And that's all Mike Pinder. So he was not getting along with some of the guys in the band, specifically Graham Edge. They were butting heads, unfortunately. And Pinder had gone through a divorce in England. He'd moved to California during the Moody's hiatus. And he was starting a new life for himself. And he just made a clean cut. He left the Moody Blues. They brought in Patrick Moraz, who was with Yes, Refugee, a bunch of other bands before that, to take his place. And he disappeared from public view. He worked for Atari, the old computer company that some of you people who might be my age or so remember. I used to play Atari in the early 80s. I didn't own a system, but my friends did. But he started doing music consult. He was a music consultant on the video games for Atari. Disappeared from the public eye, lived in California, remarried, had a new family. And then in 1994, Mike Pinder was back. He released his second solo album. And the name of that album in 1994, Among the Stars. Another album followed in 1995, A Planet with One Mind. And then he disappeared again. In 2018, he was inducted with all the other guys in the Moody Blues to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Make of that what you will. Some people like it, some people don't like it. Very controversial institution. Some of the people there might need to be institutionalized. But that's another story for another time. So Mr. Pinder was born December 27th, 1941 in Birmingham, England. And sadly, he passed April 24th of 2024 in Northern California. And here, unfortunately, he'd been living with dementia for a long time. And it's just a horrible, insidious disease that I know very well. My late father passed from dementia, so it's really tough to see someone go through that. And I know firsthand how difficult it could be. So my condolences to Mike Pinder's family, his friends, all his fans, the worldwide, of course, his fellow members of the Moody Blues. So it's just another great musician who added a lot to psych and progressive rock, has left us at the age of 82. So rest in peace, Mr. Pinder. And I just want to thank you for watching. Davey Cretin from Cretin Classics signing off. Take care. Rest in peace, Mr. Pinder.